Okay, so the first thing I've realized is that I didn't put the starting grid in. So what I'm going to do is go to line 1 and I'm going to duplicate it and I'm going to call it the start grid 1. And this is just going to be like half a meter in length. So just 0.5 for the length. And it's going to be at -9. It's a meter in, and it's also going to be obviously all the way over on the X position. So it's going to be round about here at 7 -7.5. No, -775. Yeah, that's good. And then we'll duplicate that and we'll just send it to -7. And then that will be our 2 meter starting grid there. So I think that should be fine. The other thing we could do there is, after renaming this starting grid 2, we could actually make it so that the collider isn't active, because we don't really need the colliders to be on for that. So a big new thing is we're going to bring out the gates and the pole. To control that, and actually to control lots of things in the setup and in the game itself, I've created an empty game object that I'm going to put the setup script on. So that is going to entail making a setup script. It's also going to entail making some prefabs for a gate and a pole. So the pole's the easy one, literally just a cylinder, which I've given a a material called steel. I've made the scale of it something suitable, and later on we'll put a script on this to detect peg out, so agari. But that will do as a prefab for the moment. And for the gate, the prefab for this is a little bit more complicated, and probably more complicated than it needs to be for Gateball, because I actually made it from a croquet hoop, which is why it doesn't have the typical sort of little curve in it that you'd expect from a Gateball gate. So it's got a left leg, a right leg, crown, and then it's got these little bits at the top corner, which I've called the screws, but they're just cylinders. And together, those 5 things there make up the hoop. Now, I'm sure most people would want to make this a proper Gateball looking hoop. Now, to put the number on the top, and also maybe to record other information, I've put a canvas onto the object. So that canvas is a world space canvas. It's not a screen space overlay. So that's a big thing about this canvas. And it's going to have on it 2 panels, and those panels need to be opaque. So they are given the steel material. So they'll be coloured the same as the, the the uprights and the crown of the the gate. And on each of those panels is a TextMesh Pro object. So because we've got TextMesh Pro coming in, we actually need to bring in the TextMesh Pro uh, asset pack. So that's something that will happen the moment you choose TextMesh Pro as an addition. Uh, the key thing here is that one of these panels is rotated. So the reverse panel I've got rotated at 180 degrees, so that when we turn this around, the text is facing the right way. We'll have a script on this later, and one of the main things that script will do is it will detect collisions of balls entering and going through it. So I've actually preempted that by putting a box collider which acts as a trigger in the middle of the gate. So that's our gate, and the gate has attached to it a script, and that script at the moment is just going to record what gate number it is, just an integer, 1, 2, or 3. But then it will also have these little functions here that will update the label on the gate. So I've got reference to the two TextMesh Pro fields or objects, and then I've got these functions that change the name, they'll change the text that's on in that TextMesh Pro. Now these are more complicated than they need to be, because of course you could just have a single line, but I just left it like that because sometimes you want to, well, more often in croquet, you want to be able to have a different label on different sides because the gates have a different context depending on what direction they're going through. So just to keep things flexible, I've done it like this. So to instantiate all of that, we need a setup script, and that setup script is going to be placed on an empty controller, which is just an empty game object, arbitrarily at 0, 0, and we'll need to make reference to both the gate and the pole prefabs. So the way that the script works is that we first of all make a reference within the script to those pole and gate prefabs, and then what I've done is I've actually defined 3 vector 3s, the positions of the 3 gates, and I've defined a list for the gates because it's nice to have a list of each of the gates. That might come in useful when we're doing scoring, whatever. So as we create the gates, I'm going to add them to this list, and I want a list. I want a list of these vector 3s. There's probably a way in which you can create the list of the vector 3s without having to go through this at the start, adding the gate positions one by one. But look, this works. So at the start, basically this list of vector 3 gate positions is populated with each of these 3, because these are going to be used in putting out the gates. But the easiest thing to put out is the pole. That's just a matter of instantiating the prefab at this position, 0, 0, 0, slightly raised on the y-axis, and no rotation, and we just call it pole. For the gates, we're going to go through 3 cycles because we're going to make 3 gates, and each gate that we make we're going to instantiate at the particular gate position given by the values in this list here. So the lists are obviously just of each of these positions is where each of the 3 gates is going to be instantiated. Now normally they're instantiated with no rotation, but the first gate is actually rotated 90 degrees. So I've got this little thing in here saying make the Y rotation 0 unless it's the very first gate, in which case make it 90 degrees. So when we put the gate in, the rotation for gates 2 and 3 is going to be 0, but it's going to be 90 degrees for the first gate. When you've instantiated the gate, give it a name, and of course that name is going to be one more than the little cycling number that we've got in here, and then call the, well, store that number in the gate itself, in the gate script, and then call the 2 functions that actually change the TextMesh Pro field on the top of the gate, and then finally add the gate to the list, so that by the time we've done this, we'll have a nice list of the gates. So let's see how this works in practice. The setup script has been attached to the empty controller. We've got our references to the pole and the gate prefabs. Remember, we downloaded TextMesh Pro so that the TextMesh Pro things would work properly. We've got our prefabs with the gate and the prefab for the pole, and let's see how it works. So when we press start, chug, 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 and there do appear to be some things that have gone in. Here's the first gate, gate number 1. There it is. You know what? It seems to be a bit low in the field, but we'll check that when we get a ball, and we'll just check that the height of the gate is correct. But that looks good. Number 1 has gone in at that angle. If we zoom over to gate number 2, which is over there by line number 2, it is in the correct orientation. It's a couple of meters up from the center pole, which looks as if it's been put in the right place. There's the pole at 0, 0. Gate number 1, minus 3.5, minus 8. So these positions here all look good. And gate number 3, of course, directly in line with the pole and a couple of meters away from line number 4. So that all looks fine. Why don't we actually see what happens if we fly around our lawn? So we can fly around to gate number 1, fly up to gate number 2, fly over here. That all looks nice. So that all looks good. Now the next thing we've got to do, of course, is to put in the balls.